Alright, welcome back everyone. My name is Dustin. This video is just going to be a small video where we're going to go over a bunch of the changes that I've made on the IsoToMaster branch that I'm going to be merging into the master today. There have been a lot of changes and I would like to give a brief overview of them before we start to tackle new features and issues in our engine. And the first thing we've added is isometric views. Now, isometric views are still a work in progress. As you see, we have regular and we have ISO. If I put this in here, let's load our scene. So we have our regular scene, and we also now support isometric scenes, where you give an isometric view when you're rendering the tiles. Now, the only problem is I still don't have collision and box colliding working correctly. However, I'm working on that in the back end. So in order to create a new scene, you choose scenes, then add a new scene, and then you can either choose from grid or ISO grid, and it gives you a warning right away. ISO grid maps are not fully supported. They're still in the experimental phase. I'm still working on that in the back end. So we have ISO map 2. And it says right here, just lets you know that it's not fully supported, but you can start adding them. And if you want to, try to look at the physics stuff yourself. But we're going to be working on that. Some other things that we've added is the prefabs. You can actually make prefabs now. Those are not fully supported yet either. However, I am working on it. And you have your settings, your scenes. I added a game type. Now, this doesn't do anything right now, but eventually it will. You can change all your physics stuff here. And in your scene, you have your canvas size. Then your settings, and this is where you can enable, we have something called a player start. So a player start will be kind of like Unreal's player start, where I don't have to make it in the level here, so I don't have to add a new game object, player start. I can just create a player start up here. So you add your player start, and then you can add a prefab. So right now it's just a default because we don't have any prefabs made, but you can create a prefab and look for it in here. And that's still experimental, but we're going to be working on that as well. We're going to go over that. Awesome. So let's go over a lot of the code refactoring. So there's been 152 files changed. There's been a lot of refactoring going on. I'm trying to make the code more modular and fix a lot of the naming conventions. I've also done a lot of moving of things. I did a recent update to VC package, so that changed my CMake files. So we added the player start. This is just a brief of the player start here. And there's going to be more things that are needed for sure. However, this is what we have so far. And if we scroll down here, in the core engine, this is the game type. The game type doesn't do anything yet, but it's just in case. So say you want to do a top-down, well, you might not want physics, and it'll automatically do these things for you. So say you, or if you want to use Box 2G, because that's what we're using. Say you want to use or enable physics with a top-down, you're probably going to want to have 0 gravity. So it'll automatically set that for you. That's going to be the goal. And some other changes here. We just added some comments and refactored a bunch of the code here to make it cleaner and better. Added some helpful constants here, or const expert values that we are using elsewhere in the engine. And here's the prefab. So the prefab's still an idea that I'm working on, but you're going to have to support the siblings and relationships. You're going to have to support that. And we're also going to have the prefab entity. Everything's just an optional right now. We could come up with a better idea, but this is what I'm using for now. So everything's just an optional. If it has it, then we'll actually, when we go to use the prefab, it will check to see if it's not null op. It will populate that component on the created entity from a prefab. So that's the goal with that. I also added in the filters for physics. Now, we're still not using these yet because I want to go over that, but I've added in the ability to set these filters and use the filters. Right now, they're not being used by default. And also in here in the sprite component, we had to add in the is isometric and what cell is it rendering, because it needs to know how to layer them. If you want me to go over that in a video, I will. However, right now I'm just giving you guys the code. If you've made it this far in the engine, in reality, you should be able to look at the code and kind of get an understanding of what's going on. And if anything, just pull it, build it, and mess around with it yourself. It's always good to mess around and break the code and see what happens. And if you have any questions, make sure to leave a comment. Don't hesitate to ask any questions. I'll try my best to get back to you on that. All right, let's keep going down. So yeah, just if you keep looking, just a lot of changes. I've moved things, make things cleaner. When I first started the engine, I actually used to like the private at the top. I've actually changed my preferences of coding style, where I actually like the public members and functions at the top so you can see it right away, and private stuff down below. If you want to know, you'd have to look for it. So I've basically been changing that for the entire engine. Here, if you look at the get component for the entity component. But previously, if you didn't have the component, this would actually cause an error. So what I did here was I did a try get. So I changed it to get a pointer of that component. If we do have it, then send it back. or send back Lua nil. And then you can check in your Lua if it's valid or not. So if it's not valid in Lua, that's not going to be a crash. But if we go to get component here from ENTT, this is actually going to crash because it's going to try to get a reference to something that doesn't exist. And just some more with the main registry down here and the asset manager. Oh yeah, so with the asset manager, I added a file watcher. So now we can actually watch the files. So the files are being monitored in the back end, and we create a new thread for that. So there's a new thread running, and we'll go over that as well. So here we end up with the file watcher, and we have these asset watch params. So these are different params that are now set when we first add the file or add the asset to the asset manager. And then we have these reload functions here. And we can go down here some more. What's this? This is just scene. So yeah, so if you see here, up in here, it says Scion core include core scene. I have moved the main functionality of scene and scene manager out of the editor because I think it would be beneficial to be able to have access to scenes in more than just the editor. So I'm currently working on a runtime. So the editor itself here, so if we come back over here, the editor itself is not the game. So we want to be able to export the game or package the game into its own runtime. And I'm currently working on that as well in the back end. It's not on this branch, but that's what we're going to be working on in the coming videos. Is actually, before adding more features to the editor, let's actually make it so we can package a game. That makes more sense in my mind. And then we just add more features as we need them, because if we can't package the game, we're always going to have the editor, and we're going to want to strip all the editor code, and it's going to have its own runtime stuff. So I've been trying to make everything more modular. So in the coming videos, we're going to be going over that. So let's go back over here. So scene has been moved out. Now we still have scene in the editor, but it is a child class of the scene manager here. The reason is certain things are going to be needed in the editor that we're not going to need outside the editor. Kind of like picking textures and IM-GUI. I'm not going to be using IM-GUI in the runtime. That's just for our editor GUI. And we're going to have a different GUI library that we're going to make for actual game UI. We're going to do that differently. Okay, so let's keep going. So here, we also added the crash logger. Now the crash logger is also just a work in progress as well. So what's happening is if you crash, I want to log to a file where it crashed in the code and hopefully give the Lua stack trace, because if it was caused by Lua, I want to know where it was in the program or in the Lua function calls that caused the crash. And same with some scripting things that I've added. So I've made some helpers for read-only tables here. So what this does is it will make a read-only table for Lua. Make it so we can't change this table in Lua. This is good for stuff like constants and stuff like that. So we've actually done that where we changed our math constants. Where's another one? This is the player start. We're getting to the CPP files. That would be in... Oh yes, I made some changes to the... There was an issue brought to my attention that when it comes to text, we weren't actually taking into account the text wrap or whatever of the text, and it was just moving it, rotating it by one char, so it was actually rotating it the wrong way. So I've added this in here to actually get the text block size so we can actually rotate from the center of the particular text that we have there. Now, there may be some other bugs to do with this. However, I've added this in, and it's actually helping to rotate the text. Rather than rotating from the top left corner, it actually does all the measurements and rotates from the center. And we also have this for updating dirty entities, because when we're rotating now, I need to know when to actually run this function, because you don't want to always have to check the size. We're going to want to hold on to that size and then check it only if scale or rotation changes. Then we'll check it. And there were some other stuffs here. Yeah, so all I've been doing some naming conventions. So instead of having the underscore here, I'm doing the camel case. I think that looks better in my opinion. I started it this way, but I started slowly changing it over to have that. Also, we had to add in the ISO stuff. So the sprite, these all had to be added to the bindings as well. And there's lots of changes that I've gone over. Let's go over some. So the physics here. Yeah, here's the setting the filter categories that we were talking about before. So now what we're doing here is, well, filter category is the category to the entity itself. So what category does this entity fall under, right? So you're going to set this category, and then the mask is what it can actually come in contact with. So say you have a player and a trigger. If you only want the trigger to affect players, you make sure that the player has that mask for the trigger, but entities don't. Something like, so think about Mario and you have the magic mushroom. Only the player can pick it up. The enemies can't, so enemies ignore it. That's kind of like what the mask is going to do. And then you have a group index as well. And I've made some changes here, right? So the contact entities now, it returns the vector directly. And that's because I use a read-only property. I've gone over a lot of this stuff and I'm trying to make it as clean as possible. Same with some more refactoring, text component. Yeah, so now for the text component, because I only want it to actually do that check for rotation when it's dirty, I need to check to see if any of these change as well. So if the string is changed, well, we need to mark it as dirty, so it recalculates the text box size. Same with the transform, because the transform can also affect that. So you want to check there as well if you're scale or rotation. I don't think the actual position changes matter or translation changes. So I just did the scale or the rotation. So yeah, you might not always need the file watcher. So this is actually, we have in the initialize function now, we have to tell it to enable this file watcher. And if we enable the file watcher, it's going to actually start the file watching thread. That's its own little worker, which checks all, monitors the files and monitors their last write time. If the times have changed, that's when we will reload that asset. But in something like when we package a game, we're not going to need this. We're not going to need the file watcher running. Some more changes. Yeah, so right here, now this is still in the core. This is just the scene manager. Basically, everything is just moved to the scene. You've seen, if you've gotten this far, you've already seen that stuff. And then here's the crash logger. This here is just a test that you can run in Lua to make sure it's working for you. Go down further. I just added these as static. And here, yeah, so I changed the math constants here. Right here, I was just setting them as constants here, but these weren't actually constants. In Lua, you could have still changed these values, right? Because you're only setting it the one time, and then the user could set it to something else. Now I make it as a read-only table for constants. And down here we go S2D constants. The only difference is now we don't just call S2D pi. I go S2D constants dot pi. That's what gives you those values. And here, so there's some helper functions now. We have the create a class. So instead of writing the class by hand ourselves, there's this function here. We can just say class, S2D class, and then it will return us a class. And this one will have an init function. And I'll do a video where we actually use this so we can go over it. Then I just added some helper functions here. So a deep clone and a shallow copy. That should be shallow clone as well. So just some more changes, cleaning up, refactoring. So we added in this remove state function as well. Change state, just a refactor. Yeah, lots of changes. So I recommend you guys go over a lot of these changes. So we added the tweening library as well. The measure text had to get an overload, so it has the get block size, because text block size is the one you want. However, I just kept it as an overload, so you can just send in a string in the font name, and it'll just give you a straight measure. However, this one doesn't take into account the wrapping. So if there is no wrapping, it'll give you a proper measure of the width of the text. Now this one takes in everything, but you have to send in your text component and your transform component, and it can handle it from there. Yeah, so right here, so the target sources for the latest VC package update that I had didn't take this into account. Like, it's not there, didn't compile that in, so I had to add this in order to use the SDL2.cpp. So the save project was moved. A lot of the stuff was moved to the core, so we can access it elsewhere. Anything else that's going to use the core, that is. So I added in this the player start. So let's say we have a player start. Let's go over here. I'll show you what I mean. Player start's not fully working yet, but we added that in. So let's go back over here. Say I want to add a player start to this scene. I just go here. I go enable player start. That'll give us this entity, the player start here, and where we can move it around. Let's see if this works. I'm not sure if it'll work. So we'll run the scene. run, and can't see anything. Camera's all messed up. That's all right. Let's go back to here. Move this right there. Run it. Yeah, so you see this little guy. That's just the default guy that I got off of Open Game Art. So he's automatically created for you. So you can kind of get the idea of what the player start is. However, the goal is to actually, when you have a player start, we don't want to use the default. You want to use one that you've created on your own. And right now the default guy doesn't do anything. So we're going to want to add bindings and scripts for the default one so you can move it around by default. And my goal is to create template projects, like a template platformer, template top-down game, template whatever. And that's the goal. So when you first open up the engine, you can open up a template. It'll have a bunch of code already there for you and a lot of stuff working. And you can just run it from there. Just make changes as you want. Let's go back to the changes. And there's numerous stuff we could go over here. A lot of it is just more refactoring, making the code cleaner and more robust. So that's been the goal. I've also got some other changes on the back burner that I'm going to be moving into. That's going to be it for this video. Feel free to go over this. Now I'm going to be merging this in today, so you may want to check the commit. Feel free to go over all of this. There's lots of changes coming our way. In the next video, we're actually going to go over the log display. I have some changes in the back burner that I like that are much better, and we're going to get these in today, or we're going to get these in the next video. And then over the next few months, probably 2 months is the goal. The goal is to completely create a way to package the game. And then after we can package the game, we can actually start adding in more features as needed. But if we can't package a game, I don't see what's the point, because we could work on the editor forever. So I say we add the ability to package the game, export all the files, compile all the Lua files into LUAC, bytecode. And so instead of giving someone all of your source code, you just have one main script that it reads, or a couple of files, depending on how large it is. And it's all done in bytecode, so it's harder to understand. But you don't need to touch it. And we're going to go over that in the next few videos. That's it for this video. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. You can also disable it and it'll take it away. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments or anything you want me to go over in the next few videos. Check out the code. Pull the most recent master, because I'm pushing this in tonight. So by the time you see this video, it's going to already be in master. Pull it. Try to build it. If you have any issues, any questions, or any concerns, or any ideas to start adding in, let me know. All right. Okay. That's it. Take it easy.